Welcome to B-Flow Sessions, the podcast where we help you find and stay in the flow on the water and in life. I'm your host, Brad Burton. Join me as I sit down with paddlers, athletes, and adventurers who are all seeking the flow. B-Flow Sessions is brought to you by our friends at Pucon Kayak Retreat. Are you dreaming of a Chilean whitewater escape this winter? Picture turquoise rapids, warm sunny days, and world-class rivers for every skill level, all based out of a riverside retreat built by paddlers for paddlers. If that sounds like your kind of winter, then Pucon Kayak Retreat is the place. To learn more or to book your dream kayak trip, reach out to me directly at bflowkayak@gmail.com and I'll help you get connected. B-Flow Sessions is powered by Dagger Kayaks. Wherever there's water, Dagger Kayaks will help you find your flow. Team-tested, paddler-proven designs for all paddlers and all water. And thanks to our partners at Sawyer Paddles, Stolquist PFDs, and Level 6 Gear for keeping us in the flow. Welcome to the next episode of B-Flow Sessions, and this session I am so excited to be joined by my, other than my father, my very first mentor in kayaking, somebody who took me under his wing. I've told the story before. It was kind of like the Karate Kid showing up at Mr. Miyagi's house, and he's like, "Go away, kid, until you can learn how to roll." And I was like, "Well, I don't know how to roll. You're gonna have to teach me." And so Chris Spelius finally took me to the lake, taught me how to roll, and literally like 2 years later, I was working for him on the Futaleufu. And so I am just so excited to rejoin up with Spee Buddy here. Chris, welcome to B-Flow Sessions.
Thank you. I probably had ulterior motives getting you to that role, thinking, hey, you could be an employee down here. So,
Well, it was very similar, too. I had to bug you to, yeah, I had to bug you to let you come work, to go work for you. But luckily, you started a rafting company and needed a safety kayaker. So I remember I was in Mexico, and I was, this is 1999. I'm checking email ever so often, and I get an email from you. If you can get home and get to North Carolina, I've got a job for you. I was like, I'm on my way.
Right.
So, Chris Spelius, for anybody in this sport, they should know the name. One of the grandfathers of freestyle kayaking when it was called rodeo back in the 80s. He was a guy had either a pink or a yellow helmet, had streamers. He kind of invented a lot of the early rodeo moves. He was an instructor, an expedition kayaker, big water kayaker. He was also on the flatwater sprint 1984 Olympic team, and just one of the forefathers of kayaking. And then traveled through Chile and kind of discovered this paradise on earth on the Futaleufu, and started a company, Expediciones Chile, and has been leading people down what many people, and myself included, I'm sure Chris will agree, the best river on earth in the Futaleufu. But again, Chris, just so excited to have you on B-Flow Sessions.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so I in the media, they often call the Futaleufu one of the top 3 rivers in the world. And
yeah.
I was honored here in the Valley for my early work with the river conservation. We want to talk about some things that have just happened recently. And, I started out saying, well, the same thing where they call it one of the 3 best rivers in the world. They go, those media guys don't know what they're talking about. This is number 1.
Yeah, where's the other 2?
Where are the other 2? If you take into consideration the water quality, the beauty of the river, the native forest along the side, and the grand view of the glaciers and all this, and the fact that there's some real class 5 rapids there, and a lot of play stuff. If you got something that matches that combination in water that's not ice cold, if you remember, it's
right.
Cool.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but you fall in. You're not thinking about the temperature. If you're, the raft people are not like, oh my God, this is an ice cream headache. No, they're worried about getting out. But they get out and it's not like they're cold at all. So it's a lot warmer than U.S. mountain rivers. So,
for sure.
It is a great place. And I was not a lot of people down here, credit me with all sorts of things. I've been around a long time, but I wasn't the first guy to run the Futaleufu. I did run it solo, but a group of and I think they maybe think that I try to take credit for it. I don't know, but I'm not. And it was Phil DeReamer and Lars Holbeck, some real
Okay.
good. And Phil, a great teacher, and Lars Holbeck I met way back in the days. He taught me how to hop a train with a kayak. So I thought that was pretty fun. Because, like a lot of kids, my mom said, "Oh, you don't go hop a train," because I was always interested in trains. You're going to lose your leg, lose your foot. So when I actually met a guy that joined me on a trip by hopping a train to Salt Lake City, I was really impressed with that.
Well, let's talk about how you found your flow in kayaking, and so take us back from the beginning with your family. I know you spent a lot of time on rivers as a young person, and then tell us about getting into kayaking and progressing through the 70s and 80s in the sport.
Well, I'd say first of all, my mom and dad, especially, were really unusual people. They had they graduated from college at Berkeley.
Okay.
So they're sort of the progressives of the day, maybe. And my mom was from Montana, and my dad was from Wisconsin. And my dad was into the winter sports, and my mom into horseback riding. My mom was a competitive swimmer, actually Montana state champ, which my daughter became a state champ too of Idaho. So
That's
I guess
awesome.
that's pretty cool. But the family did this river trip. Well, actually, my mom planned this out. She was a writer, and she wrote travel stuff for the Cincinnati Enquirer and later the Chicago Tribune. But she had hatched this journey since she was young, living on the banks of the Missouri River. She wanted to reverse the run of Lewis and Clark, and go down the Mississippi, and then go up to the Ohio to Cincinnati, where we lived at that time. And for a young kid, I was 7 years old, but it must have had a big impact on me because I remember a lot of it. And you're outdoors for 3 months, and we're on the river every day, camping outside at times, sleeping in the boat at times, interacting with the people along the river life, so to speak, the barges. And as she was writing these articles, I don't know how she sent it back to Cincinnati. I don't know what was available. Faxes, I have no idea, but she was finding these stories. And I should ask my sister. She's a little older and remembered it, and see how she filed these stories. But it would get syndicated and start getting picked up other places and other newspapers on St. Louis and on the route. So sometimes these little towns, they'd be expecting us. And like, what mother in her right mind takes, my sister, I think, was 3, and I was 7. My other sister was 9, and my brother was 15. And I think a lot of it had to do with my mom wanting my brother to, mature and, be the co-captain with her. And because she was writing this stuff, she's an early influencer, right? She contacted the boat company that was out of Bellingham, Washington, and they gave us a boat. And they talked to the motor company, and they gave us motors. So she had her sponsors back then, like you and Dagger, or me and Dagger back that day. Maybe I saw that as a role model. I don't know. But so we're floating down this river, and I was a pretty shy kid, but they were being received very well. Like some farmer, his back fields were on the river. He'd come down and invite us up to the family farm to have steaks. And so it's really fun, and it was really fun to feel like you were doing something for some reason other people thought was pretty special. But when we go through the file cabinets of my mom and dad after their death, there were family members writing my dad saying, "How do you let your wife do this?" I mean, this is 50s. This is 58. So how are you letting your wife taking your genetic potential down these rivers by her, herself, her kids? And, I just found that hilarious because my mom was, she was full on, full bore. And
I mean, that had to plant such a spark in you, and just, totally prime you for the adventures that you would go on to lead, in kayaking.
I think so. I blame it on my mom and dad, because my dad was very, what I call the real world outside. He lived for his outdoor activities. There's no doubt about that. He was in his outing clubs and school and all that kind of stuff. but I blame them for my exit from the real world. And because he was real world, totally, pretty powerful businessman. And I did have the feeling that he lived for the outdoor life, though. So we would go skiing, and we would spend a month every summer at Isle Royale National Park in Lake Superior. And that's actually where I first started kayaking, in a sea kayak kind of deal. And I think, and he was very careful with his money, but I had the feeling that I don't know, he was obviously doing well, and he was careful to downplay his success because I think he was ending up making more money than his bosses. And that doesn't go over so well in a company, and because he was getting commissions, and so if a boss was coming over to dinner or something like that, he'd hide his cars. He would drive around the part of the neighborhood, and he'd always underdress, everywhere he went.
Yeah.
So, but he was doing well, and but we always felt like we weren't doing that well. But everything's a bubble. It's like we'd go skiing and be in the cheapest accommodations at Sun Valley, Idaho. The rich people stayed over here and stayed over there. But as a kid, you don't know that. I had hand-me-down ski gear, so you see all the other guys with all the latest gear, and we thought, okay, we're just not well-to-do. But you put it in perspective later. Hell, we're skiing, and in a really great place. But that's the perspective. And, I had to do all the yard work. The other neighbors had the Mexicans coming in back in those days even, and, ripping through, doing their lot. And since we had a pretty big yard to play baseball and football in, the neighborhood kids would grab their parents' lawnmowers and help me finish cutting the lawn, or we couldn't play till my chores were done. So it was a pretty fun neighborhood in that sense. And it was a swimming neighborhood. And an Olympian, Adolf Kiefer, who was back in the Berlin Olympics, had won a gold medal in backstroke. So their family was there, and we had some good swim teams in the city, and the whole neighborhood was a swimming. And so water was a big deal for all of us. So let's see, where was I going with that? But that neighborhood, that background made me sort of a water person. And then my parents, I'd say the biggest thing for me is being an outdoor person. I mean, it was almost spiritual for me, and imagine, Brad, on the Futa, how it is, that native forest along the side, and there's no poisonous spiders and no poisonous snakes. There's no animals that are going to maul you like when you're in Alaska. There are pumas up, but I was careful with my Chiloe. When the snows come, first snows up top, it sends all the animals down quick. And,
sure.
You can see the wild boar, and you can start seeing pumas. And if the food's around, if there's food around, the pumas are there. So I noticed it in the pandemic. The pandemic in the parks, I got stories. But anyhow, the Futaleufu thing is just a perfect place for me, because my other side of the family had a ranch in Montana, and all the farm animals and all that stuff. So here's Futaleufu with this nature, wild forest, and there's also the farmland. Like when I was a kid and we're going out in Montana to the uncle's ranch. So like our family's going from east or Midwest to the west every year, winter and summer, to visit the farm family, and in the winter to go skiing. So I got used to this two different lives, and I loved the West.
Yeah.
I didn't realize how advanced the suburb was that we lived in, what facilities the school had, the swimming pools. I just thought that was the world.
Right.
And, I didn't really realize that wasn't the world till my first kayak trip back to the Appalachians. I went all the way through the Appalachians, starting on the Chattooga up north to the Niagara, actually, to scout that river up. And when you see the Appalachia, you go, oh, hey, these are real towns. These aren't suburbs and shopping malls and stuff. This is real America. And so this cultural thing happened to me too, and I really started enjoying. It's not just the people I'm paddling with, because I did a lot of paddling solo in Chile, but the people you're meeting and the culture you're interacting with, along with the nature. I mean, that's too much of a formula for me. You got the cowboy country, you got the rivers that are unexploited, and you got this warm Chilean Latin culture, and
Yeah.
being immersed in nature too. So yeah, it blew my mind. Everything I liked in life was down here in Chile, and in easy to access and in spades. You know, you already had to be a millionaire to buy a ranch in Montana or something. Where, you know, if I would have liked to live if I was in the States, but I'm certainly not a millionaire. But you know, I got land here and made my life. But that background, you you hear that with a lot of people, that they have this dream when they're young, or they know what they like when they're young, and they end up doing that kind of stuff. And that
Sure.
was true for me. I mean, I
So
like
talk to us.
traditional sports, but go ahead.
Let's eddy out and take a quick break. Do you need a break from the cold of a North American winter? Then let's head south to the best whitewater on earth at Pucon Kayak Retreat. Email me at bflowkayak@gmail.com to learn more about how you can take the ultimate paddling adventure in the heart of Chile. Now let's peel out and head downstream.
Yeah, talk to us then about how, like, getting into specifically whitewater kayaking. I mean, I know you had a background in flatwater sprint as well, but you know, whether it's getting involved in expeditions or the early days of the freestyle tour. I mean, you kind of like invented the idea of like earlier guys like you and Corin and Dan Gavir kind of started like the whole idea of pro kayakers and getting sponsored and stuff. So, and then teaching at NOC, all that early days of whitewater. Talk to us about some of that.
Okay, so I got into the kayaking in Lake Superior in storm surf. And so
Okay.
I really enjoyed that. And I knew about whitewater kayaking because, the Olympics in '72, watched that. And I knew I wanted to get into it. And I was still in, I don't know, 8th grade or high school. And my dad was not so receptive to buying a kayak. In fact, where he stored his boat, they sold whitewater kayaks in those days, Old Town. And he wasn't that helpful. But when I got off to college, I did have my first mentor that helped me get into real whitewater kayaking, not just getting in a storm surf and goofing around. And he was a disciple of Roger Perez, who was a French world champion and was teaching out at Rocky Mountain School there near Aspen, and
Okay.
really brought techniques. A lot of people had gotten exposure to him in the early days, just a little more advanced than the U.S. was at that time. So then this guy was a really good teacher, Eric Leeper, and he went to school with me. As soon as I figured out what he knew, man, I started tailing him. and we started a pool session at the University of Utah, and then that grew pretty quick, and then we started a Wasatch Whitewater Association. We got into environmental stuff, and you're gung-ho about the environment when you're in school, and I still am, but so I got immersed in that right away, and he was sending me in the really good foundations of the roll. So for an English class, I wrote how to do paper on the kayak roll. I just learned it, so I really paid attention to it, and so I started teaching right away as soon as and we started teaching the roll. So you have that cannon fodder to practice on, right? You got the theory in your mind. You've seen the literature around the world at the time. And, I'm a little obsessive on something, a little too much at times. So so then I started kayaking in Utah. It's not real close to anything, but it's pretty close to a lot of stuff. So
Right.
The Provo River, I think, was my very first run, and then they had a slalom race set up there. This is early days. Slalom race set up 3 weeks later. Oh yeah, and Provo River is in a big flood. Before I got in a kayak, it was in a big flood, and we took tubes down this stretch, and it went into the whitewater stretch, and that created such a ruckus. And that whitewater experience was just chaos coming into this tube, and it was pretty iffy to get out of that river at this bridge. Really iffy what we were doing. But it just slammed in my brain. That night I was driving home and I'm going, oh my God, I just saw that whitewater coming at you. You're at tube level. I found it very stimulating. So that was my first experience, stupid experience. And these guys that were watching, were calling the police and all this stuff. But that impacted me greatly. So then my sister was dating a guy that could get a hold of kayaks that were made in Utah, Cedar City, Utah, Dick-held boats. And they had a design called the TJ1 from Tom Johnson, who was before your time, out in California, that made the holoform. Do you remember hearing about the holoform kayak? You heard about that?
Yeah, know of it. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was the first plastic boat, and it was a design that was similar to the holoform, but in glass and smaller. And so I had my chance to get my first whitewater kayak for $130 in glass. And then I started paddling rivers in Utah. And then when you go down to the Green River in flood in the spring, or the Colorado at Westwater Canyon, ever heard of that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's like a little mini Grand Canyon. I mean, that's impactful paddling. You're in a black gorge. You're in a real gorge. And boy, I found it super stimulating. So I'd do that when school started every weekend. And then I just said, okay, this is 4 weekends in. I got to start getting serious about, studying over the weekend too. So go as long as I could. And the fall weather there in southern Utah was still perfect. And it might be snowing at the ski areas in Salt Lake City. But down in southern Utah, it could still be warm, 78 degrees, 80 degrees during the day in October, maybe even into November. So I really knew that I liked this sport. And in such a small arena, I don't know if Utah would, if you saw a car with a kayak on, you'd be shocked. So in such a small arena,
Right.
the previous kayakers were like my chemistry professor that had run an expedition in Peru. They weren't particularly athletes or outdoor guys, and they were good enough for the day to learn to roll and go run some pretty interesting rivers elsewhere in the world. So, my generation was like, for the time, it was a young start, and we were athletes in other sports.
Sure.
My generation, but there were no kids paddling. The boats didn't make sense for them. That changed. But man, I remember thinking, how come it's so hard to teach these kids? Well, some of it had to do with they're in these adult boats. And
Right.
I noticed as working at NOC and my comrades were having kids, then the kids were getting younger starts, and of course EJ came up with a small boat, and there were small boats coming up. But once I started working on the rivers, for a summer job in college, I felt like I had been there before. Like the Missouri River is not that different than the flat water on the Colorado. The western environment. And I thought, God, I couldn't really figure it out. I go, I've been here before, or did I have a previous life? Because this thing had imprinted me at 7 years old, and I'm on the above Cataract Canyon. There's 2 or 3 days of flat water. It's the same kind of flow of a river. It's sort of muddy, but in the afternoon light, it's very sensual. The glassiness of it, the eddy lines, the swirls. And we had run the Missouri in high water in the spring. We started in Fort Benton, Montana, which is now a wild and scenic river up there, the first part of our run that we did with the family. And I associate the part of the river running I like the best, I think, obviously I love the big water, but that hits me deepest in the spirit is, the interface with nature. And those it's not as much partying with your kayaking buddies afterwards. I'm probably not that much of that kind of guy, but the interaction with the Westerners along the rivers, and even the Indians. My mom was a writer, and she arranged a deal where the Standing Rock Sioux, it was very controversial in the environmental world about the pipeline. I don't know which government wanted to put the pipeline and interfere with the reservation. We were there in their ceremony, only whiteys there in this ceremony they had that let my mom film and write about. And so when the Standing Rock Sioux came very controversial about this pipeline stuff, it was going, I've been there. And we saw the photos of that. And they were super nice to us, just unbelievable. And that was a real privileged experience. But I'm wandering around a little bit here. But so this nature river connection, and I see it as something that I've studied so hard. Like I ran a river in Tibet solo, and a lot of rivers solo. And what do I do when I do that? I'm observing. Like even trying to figure out, Brad, why on the inside of corners does that inside eddy have wells of water come up? All over the world that happens. Big sharp turn, and you
Right.
see the well of the water come up inside. And I go, okay, I got to figure this one out. Or even there at Chattooga at Woodall Shoals, that final jet that leaves the rapid. You feel those, if you swim underneath the current, you can feel those underwater eddies as you swim across. And, that's a real intimate relationship with the water. Even at Bull Sluice, you can dive into that pothole and disappear on that river. You dive through the side of a pothole and enter another main pothole. You can sit there and breathe as the water's swirling around in there, and you can pop up. And all those things were very fun for me, as a swimmer, and feeling the currents with my hands and stuff like that. I never really got into squirt boating. I think it was just too big of a guy to fit in those damn boats. I didn't want to be that uncomfortable for that long. But I could see the appeal of it for the guys that were really into it.
Sure.
But so then you're a big, in Utah, you're suddenly an expert. When first year paddler, and you're better than anyone around you, that doesn't mean that much. But it made me think big, and
Right.
So and I'm like, let's see. So I had run Westwater in extreme floods, and obviously I had a bomber roll. I mean, in my lifetime, I can't tell you how many practice rolls I've done, even to this day, still analyzing the roll in the hot pool out in Idaho. But that's one of the things that I think is really important for the younger paddlers is, you get every kind of roll that there is, and get them on both sides and make that a deal. And you go down rivers, you're confident.
Right.
And at least in those days, my thing was bigger the better. So when we did this Eastern trip, this was a big deal for us guys from Utah. We were going to go see what was going on back there. And we started in the spring, and I think the first river I did was the Chattooga. Now, how can you not love the Chattooga?
Sure.
It's in the southeast, big cities around or, nearby, and there's this reserve of just beautiful water. And I paddled it every day solo in January when I first went back east. And that's a pretty nice experience in the winter. It could be warm in South Carolina on certain days in the winter.
Yeah.
Reasonably, I had pogies, I suppose. But, you could sit out in the sun a little bit and warm up. And I really do have a lot of love for that river. I'd love to go back to it. But it's also that interaction with, because it's not a real play river or anything particularly, but it's a pretty badass river in floods.
Yeah.
So go back east, and I went through that run, the Nola Chucky, the Golly, the new in a huge flood, 65,000 CFS kind of flood. And the goal was to get up there and check out Niagara. And the reason I had the connection with Niagara is I was working in Utah, and when they did this trial raft run on Niagara, and my boss at Holiday River Expeditions, front page in Salt Lake Tribune, raft kills, I don't know how many people were killed, flipping in the Niagara Falls rapids below the falls. And my boss is going, He was a big water rafter on Cataract Canyon. When other companies stopped running in high water in the spring, he kept running. And he had these triple rigs. There were, the 3 rigs with a front oar and a back oar. So it's 3 normal rafts, or 3 pretty big rafts tied together. And you go blasting through these rapids. It's pretty stable, but it's a hell of a hard time to control. So you have 2 boatmen, one in the front and one in the back. And he's talking about, wow, if our rigs, if we could do this. It says 125,000 in Niagara, but we're rowing 65,000 here in Cataract Canyon in a flood. And so we're sitting there talking around. And once again, I was kind of a newer guide on the river, but I was the only one that had the advantage of kayaking. So when I showed up, they try to give you all the rookie shit and, felt a little bit inferior. All these guys had been trained up. I'm trying to figure out how the kitchen works and all this stuff. But then as the season started going on, I realized I had an advantage on how to run these runs, because they were still, in those days, they're still doing a lot of ferrying back and forth, rowing upstream. And I'm going, and they're having trouble on this one rapid in Western. I said, and I ran it as a rookie, like I did a kayak, pulling over my shoulder, punch the diagonal, you're home free in the eddy. You spin out in the eddy. Yeah, and one of our guys flipped, and then they started asking me. I said, "Jesus, 3 weeks ago they're giving me shit about being a rookie and not knowing how to run the camp right, and here they're asking me for advice 3 weeks later." So that was, realizing that kayaking, is a huge advantage in the rafting world, and
Sure.
whatever scene it is, and using that positive speed rather than slowing your speed down so you can see. So, of course, I was kayaking every chance I could, but I also thought, you're kind of a glorified stewardess or something here. It's fun. I'm outdoors. I love that. But I was obsessed with kayaking. So I felt that this job, these 6 days overnight trips, often I'd take a kayaking along and tie it onto a raft and kayaking in the evening or something. And the boss kind of, let me do that. But I started thinking about Nantahala. I'd heard about these training camps in Nantahala, and I'm thinking, boy, I bet you could work there and paddle every day. But rafting in those days in the West made big money. I mean, it helped your college, right? I mean, it
Sure.
helped you get through college, live better during the winter and stuff like that. You were making money. In that era, I think trip leaders were getting, and these are $70,
Right.
so you getting $65 a day, which would be, maybe 200 a day now, something like that, 250,
Easily.
something
Yeah.
like that. Yeah, so that's pretty good guides pay. I mean, bought my first car,
Right.
Volkswagen van, and sort of relatively styling it, right? So then go back east. I checked out Nantahala, and I think I talked to Ray McLeod. What would it take to get a job here? Oh, and how I got the job out west was I was running Westwater at a flood, and D. Holiday rose up, and the only company on the river says, "Are you kayaking this thing?" Because to them that was crazy being in a kayak. To me, it was them being crazy being in a raft. You don't have any recovery,
Yeah.
and that's how I got that job. And then they asked me, they needed someone, and there's some stories around that too. That year was the biggest flood year since till the '80s. That was in the '70. When was that? '78, I think, '77. So out west, you know what the season's going to be like, dependent on that ski season. I mean, if there's lots of snow, they're
Sure.
going to have lots of runoff. Down here in Futaleufu, there's some of that. But I think you might remember, I think the year here was fairly wet season, was it?
Yeah.
Do you remember?
Yeah. Because
Right.
I don't know if you remember that year. That was the World Rafting Championships, and then
Right.
there was film crews that came there, and so and Adventure Quest was there with Shane Benedict and all those guys, and not many people ran Zeta that year, and you and I ran it for the first time. You and I did just the two of us did a trip down Inferno Canyon, and I ran it I had 2 days before I was leaving, and I finally ran it because it was high all year.
Oh yeah. Okay. And did we sort of punch the diagonal on the right and get into the pampa there and make the turn? Is that what we did
Well,
on Zeta?
I don't mean this snarky, and I don't mean this to brag, but you walked it that day, and I ran it.
Oh, you did. Oh,
Yeah.
congratulations.
Yeah.
So did I say a reason why I was walking it on that thing? Was it that I
You
not like the looks of it?
just I don't know, you weren't feeling it, and you're like, but of course, and people don't know Spee, it's studs and babes. He was like, "Stud, you got the line, you do it, man. I'll be down here."
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So when let's see, I don't know where the death happened in that whole thing of some kayaker that was tagged along with BOBO ended up dying in there, but it really turned a lot of people off from running it.
Yeah, a lot of people started walking
Fewer
it then,
people. Yeah. And, before that, I heard people say, "Oh, it's a wash. You just wash it." Well, it's not just a wash because you got that underground rock and that's steady. But those guys were wrong that said that it was a wash. But it's certainly runnable. But not many do it now.
I
And
think the move is easier than Throne Room or Terminator. Of course, Terminator, you've got all
yeah,
kinds of moves, but I mean, it's just one move, but the
yeah,
consequences
you got
are
to be
so
precise
daunting.
on that one move, though. One
Yes.
precise deal. And you come and go. Oh, I know another thing that's happened. You know how I think I talked to you about coming from the left side a bit
Yep.
and driving across the center of it and hitting that diagonal in kind of an unusual angle. So it's not
Yes.
only diagonal; it's an explosion there. And bam, you hit that explosion. Well, there's a tree right in that now, a
Oh,
trunk upstream, right where I would run. So that's inhibited me a bit. And there's a lot of ways to run it though, but that worked for me for a long time. That diagonal, that upstream tree. You'd think, how can it stay in there with the currents in the vortex of the Zeta? Think of the velocity of the river in the narrowest spot on the river, and one of the bigger drops.
Right.
Good Lord, that velocity got to be max.
So I remember now why we were actually taking a raft down Inferno Canyon, and it was going to be the first time us taking a raft through. And so, of course, the rafts had to portage Zeta, and so you were going to be assisting with them, and you had given me the green light to just go ahead and run it. But when we were going through Inferno Canyon, the last drop of Inferno Canyon, and I don't remember the order of the names, but we needed to catch an eddy to set safety, and we kind of miscommunicated of who was going to catch that eddy, and we both missed it, and we were like downstream of a pour over waiting on the raft, and you and I were trying to do the attainment move to get back up in there, and I finally got it, and I just remember like I got this move in front of my mentor, like I've arrived, like I
Was that Inferno or was that
that was like
Inferno or
exit
Throne
of
Room?
Inferno.
Oh yeah, okay. I know. We were supposed to be on that eddy on the river, right?
Yep. And
Yeah,
we
yeah. Oh
caught an
yeah.
eddy behind like this pour over, like almost like right in the center. And so we like blasted up the pour over and did an attainment to get back to that eddy.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, no, that's an important eddy. I mean, I've been in
Yeah.
there for a trip, and at times you really need to be here. And I remember one trip where a woman just went out of the raft. They weren't even in the eddy, and it right into that eddy. And I was so glad I was there. And of course, she thought I saved her life, but I just said, grab on, we're getting out of here right away because there's an undercut behind you, and there's a
Right.
pour over up in front of you, and it's a crazy environment. For a normal
Yeah.
person, that is crazy. Usually, only Class 5 paddlers get in places like that.
That's
So
right.
so taking those rafts is a little absurd. But yeah. Okay, so you asked about this transition into the freestyle thing. That for me basically happened. Young punk, studs, babes, all that stuff. I always felt like, as I told Dagger, I said, I see this paddling is, you run the Koi so many times, and you hit all the eddies, and you love it. But the Koi for me is not this nature reserve like
Right.
the Tortuga. My heart's in harmony when I'm on that river, and I relate to the river in a different way by myself than when you're with a big raft group or even with other people. It shifts the focus. And
Sure.
my daughter feels it too. I mean, she's running the Futa by herself, and she feels that too. I mean, we love running together, but so the Tortuga, you don't have that stimuli that it's people on the shore. And I started noting this transitioning in sport, in the kayak sport, was now the challenge for me is not the difficulty of the Koi, but making these moves at double trouble in the day. Like you could be entertained there, and it rips you up even more like a swim workout. I mean, to make the attainment moves we were making there, and then the rodeo was coming up there, so there was a double trouble wave, and I could actually figure out a way to jump up to the next wave, which is hard to do in the middle of standing waves.
Right.
And I had learned stealing things from some people. This might be a long story, but when I was in New Zealand training for the flatwater stuff, these guys are big into these surf competitions and lifeguard competitions. And this older guy who was my mentor in New Zealand in the flatwater world, and he was a coach, and he never had lost these surf ski race, never had lost. But now there's 4 young Olympic paddlers, flatwater paddlers, they are going to win a gold medal within months, right? They're going to the surf competition this weekend. I could see Benny goes, God, I've never lost before. I've never lost before. And he was really under pressure. And he's in his 30s, but at that time to me he was an old man, in his
Right.
30s. And these other guys were 23, 22, and they all 4 went out and won a gold in the K4. And
Oh, wow.
they were great training buddies. So let's see. So he's in this race. What they do in this surf ski. You know what a surf ski is?
Yeah, yeah.
This they take it out in the surf, right? And there's a little fan up in front to sort of make sure the bow goes up and over in the big surf. So they go
Right.
blasting out in the surf. They come flying across. They have these little water polo kind of hats on, so it's pretty cool. They go blasting out along the surf and then coming in as if they had made a rescue, and then they have to jump out of that boat and run to a flag on the beach, right? So
Okay.
so they're flying around, and all four of these Olympic guys are ahead of my going out. And I'm thinking, I'm just hoping he can pull it off. And I realize when they're going parallel to the shore, I'm just going, oh, Benny's going to lose it here. I'm hoping for the old guy. And they start coming in, and they catch the last wave, or catch their wave coming in really early. Really early. So they're on the wave, and Benny's still back there, but it's not gotten so steep it's impossible for him to catch. So he just starts sprinting like mad, and he comes just enough to get on the same wave as them. All right? So there's these four studs, and Benny, sort of a little pot-bellied, and they're starting to come down, and Benny just holds back. And I'm going, what? He's given up. He's giving up. He's holding back, and all these guys start sprinting ahead of him. Now, these are Olympic guys, and they're sprinting so fast, racing amongst themselves. Who's going to, get to shore quicker? So they get to the bottom trough of the wave, and at a beach or something, and it starts building another little wave towards the beach. So their speed's sort of limited. You follow me? And now it's a matter to them who's strongest. And Benny's held back, and then he lets it rip as he comes to shore. So he goes flying down with all the gravity of that wave at its peak and goes flying by them all and punches through that. Now, that taught me a lesson in whitewater, big time. So he goes flying. I remember Bob McDonough asked me, how was I doing that? So I explained the theory. Because on double trouble, it's surf, hold back on the wave, and put the what was I paddling? A squish saber. Put it on edge, and with that momentum you came from the top of the wave, hold it back, get far back in the wave as you can, and then dive down on edge, and you could actually cut through that wave upstream, which seems, without that technique or in another boat, would be impossible.
Right.
And you'd catch up the next wave. Now, that wave, you could surf back and forth and spin on the hole over on the right side. So that's a lot of maneuvering. That'd be a lot of energy. I mean, you do 2 hours there, and you've paddled, right? And then there's no motivation of competition in my mind. There's a crowd there, and there's girls in the crowd, right? So that you're having fun, you're totally relaxed, you're showing off, you're doing something that no one else is really doing at the time, and on our Arcoe anyhow, and that's like an optimum time for learning. Like, oh, I want to get up there, I want to do that. You have no fear. It's warm water. You got your hands rolls both sides, anything. Even your paddle breaks, your skirt blows, you're not in trouble there. And I felt like that was an optimum time of learning. And so then how I got into it is I was working for Perception before. I always felt bad about this because Perception was treating me well. I could go to their factory, and they sponsored a video, or I did a video for them, actually. They paid for it, for rolling videos. And Dagger started up, and they wanted to steal me away from Perception, and they didn't want me to tell them. And that part I felt bad. Do you follow me? But Bill Masters seemed to forgive me, and he didn't hold it against me. I really respect him for that, because I was put between a rock and a hard place. These new guys wanted me not to tell anybody jumping over. And then the Perception Dagger Wars started, right?
Right.
And that was a very stimulating time. But I'm just paddling for the fun of it and showing off and loving it. And, it is fun on the river. And but I would go over there solo, and just whoever's on the river I'd meet up with, and there'd be a crowd there. And I went back to Dagger, and I said, I think this sport's starting to change. It's not just like me. I love the wilderness. I love the wilderness river. But people are around other people. Their clothes are not going to be from the Goodwill anymore. They're going to want to have the latest equipment, the latest helmet. That started happening like it did in the ski industry. And that was a distinct change, Brad. And because people are going to see you now. You got the any old thing to stay warm in, right? Now suddenly style and color and blah, blah, blah. So then, so when Joe was with Perception, he took me up to rodeos, the Eastern Freestyle Championships, and I won that. And he said, Chris, there's some real potential here for you to do something for us, give demo days or, go to these rodeos. And so he started planting the seed there when he was with Perception. And then he grabbed me when he
Okay.
started Dagger. And then they talked about me entering the company, but I had Chile going already.
Right.
And so I said, I had a consultant. I'm not, you'd have to drag me away from Chile. Come on, dude. You know the scene down there.
Yeah. Futaleufu's a little better than Harriman, Tennessee.
Yeah, right. But Joe, give him credit. He knew that if I was going to help with boat design and promotion, that I had to be paddling all the time. And I even made a deal where I didn't have to paddle a Dagger boat when I'm out on the river all the time. In there was that I could paddle any boat I want because I got to test these boats out and see what the competition's doing. It makes sense.
Sure.
When McDonough came into the scene, he was a powerful competitor for Perception because he was doing the same thing.
Right.
You got to live it. If you're just designing a boat, computer program's not going to do it for you. You got to be paddling all these other boats and see where the trend's going and the evolution was going. So for me, they started sending me these rodeos, and I thought I was, maybe Rob Lesser was the first pro paddler, but not quite at the same level of going off to compete everywhere. He'd go to the rodeos, do demo boats and all that. So now suddenly, Rob Lesser has a competitor coming out to all these events where he's supporting the kayak world, going to the events, competing in the rodeo, whatever it was, and demoing his boats. He's kind of an ambassador for Perception. Now I'm doing that also, right? But if you win the rodeo, like the Eric Jackson model, you win a rodeo in the States, and that's, or in Chile, and people think that's a boat to have, So,
right.
And Jackson's done very similar kind of thing, and done it in spades. So, but I know the American mentality that works, and even Brad Dagger gave me my first 15 boats for Chile, and even when you got 2 guides paddling in Dagger boats, and all the clients paddling in Dagger boats, and someone's there with his own boat or another boat, they start thinking the power of the bubble. They start thinking, wow, I want to try this boat out. And the boat wasn't even superior. It was like a Response and Crossfires. I mean, Crossfire was a good boat for the time. But that group mentality, the right people saying, I mean, I can never really bullshit and say this is the best thing ever, except for the RPM, I said that. But
yeah, pretty easy to do when the RPM came out.
Yeah, pretty easy to do in the RPM. I said to Dagger, this is going to be, this is another operating system. It changes it from you riding a boat that you are the boat, the lower body. The lower body is the boat. So,
of course, the original transition that you all used, that original transition was almost like what the RPM became, right?
Right. And they screwed the plastic transition up. They thought no one could handle it. And Joe believed me when I said, Joe, I teach all the time. This is going to be better for beginners, and it's better for the rodeo. And the rest of the company sort of scoffed at me, but Joe believed me on that. So thank God. And the rest of the people at the company, they see work is in the factory. What the hell is Chris doing? I would be late. I was paddling with Mark Lyle, and Mark Lyle was in Team Dagger, and I thought this guy had a real chance, to win this thing, and he got to get his paddling in too. So to me, for Dagger to win the rodeo, and they got first and second, I think, was like, we're designing a fighter plane to defend your home country. That's how important it was to me. I was talking about it, my obsessive nature, talking about it to 2 a.m. with Lyle, testing boats, drawing lines, measurements, smashing boats down. No, this is the way and then I remember Lyle, I'd come back from a Western rodeo, and there were some good guys out there, talented guys, but they didn't have the access to the boat companies to get, modify the boats or something. But I learned some stuff, and I would steal it quickly, So in those days, it was like doing these retained attentive enders, and these were spectacular to a crowd that knows nothing. So you'd go down and you go up, and in the air you'd snap the boat and land back down. Way more spectacular than these low-angle cartwheels to a common observer. We expect the cartwheels because we know it's cool. But in those days, anyone on the show would go, "What the hell?" You'd fly up in these big Western boats with the volume. And the guys, there was a couple of guys I remember, Bob Patterson and Jeff Garrett. And Jeff Guerin was, I could tell right away, he was a smooth athlete, and he was doing some stuff. Of course, I came back east, a couple other rodeos. I won those rodeos too, but I came back and said, these guys are a step ahead of us in this maneuver, not in surfing, not in attaining or stuff like that, but they're ahead of us on the smoothness of these retendos. And that's where I started thinking in the RPM, I was thinking, okay, Mark, if we overshoot where we're driving that bow in, overshoot, and then you bring it back, you need that bow to be able to slice it in. And you slice it in and start turning the boat with your hips. You're not thinking of the boat taking you up for a ride, but you turn, so now the boat's halfway turned before it's going down, right? And you can control it because you've overshot and you're slicing it at the angle you want. And so that started giving a lot of control to these maneuvers in the holes. And of course, for me, a light hole, I'm a big guy, or thuggy guy, and I would come up against these guys, former slalom paddlers, and really small bodies. And so I quickly realized if it was a massive hole, I had the advantage. If it was a hell hole, you make one mistake and you're out of there. And in the big holes, I could throw the paddle away and do whatever the fuck I wanted, and I loved it. And other people, out west wouldn't do that. And then the light touch, but these light touch guys were really a threat in these rodeos, unless it was a big hole. So, and who's a light touch guy? Well, Corin's really light. Oh, the evolution of the roll. I was really dogmatic in the different styles of roll, and then Corin comes up. He's got hurt shoulders all the time. And he starts doing this kind of back deck roll, and like, Corin, you want to be doing that? And I didn't embrace it right away, but something works, you're gonna embrace it. So what he was doing though, he didn't want to get out of that hole in hell hole. It was a light touch hole. I didn't even know it was still there. And
it's still there.
What he would do is do that back. So he wouldn't drag through. So what I would do, I'm this big thug, I would go over and shit, it's gonna pull me out. So I'd let go of my paddle. Because the paddle, if they're starting to set up or something, let go of the paddle and hang on at the very end. And I get away with it and stay in the paddle and I'd pretend I'd lost it or something. And then I just bring it back in, right? And then the crowd would think, wow, how did he grab that paddle again? But that was my response to, I can't be dragged out of this thing. And I could feel the pressure building on the paddle. So I just slipped it down to the very end, right? And let it go parallel with the current. And not be so dogmatic about my setup. But it didn't really register right away. I thought, come on, you're going to fuck your shoulder more. You follow me?
Yeah.
Excuse my language. But okay. That was a pretty big evolution. So what's happening now in the sport, you got Dagger and Perception, blood enemies, and a world championship coming up in a plastic recreational boat. So now there is real motivation to, hey, guys, we got to win this thing. Because they had already pointed out to me, I'd go to Idaho, there was just, a local rodeo, and I'd win, and they'd show the sails, like before it was a Dancer, now it's a Crossfire. Not a super superior boat, but superior to the sails would go up. And they go, Chris, Troy, I like traveling, but I don't like traveling every week. I'm trying to run a business too, Chile. And so my life, I don't know if I was ever more active at that time. Paddling with Lyle, discussing boats till 2 a.m, driving over to Dagger, calling Chile, meeting with Lon Chile. There was, and I had to get those 2 hours. How can you be competitive if you're not paddling, 2-3 hours a day, focus, training, right?
Right.
You got it. So they would, the other guys would make snide comments when I'd come over an hour late or something like that. And I go, I'm just trying to get you guys to win this thing. I don't care if it's me, Shipley, Jackson, Mark Lyle, myself. We got to win this. And if we got 4 in the run-in, the chances are better. So, at that point in time, I'm not certain really how talented I am at anything. I almost feel like the world's conspired to make things happen for me that I haven't even planned. I feel like Forrest Gump, sort of a doofus. Good things just happen.
Yeah.
And I get credit for things I've done. I get, like, okay, so Outside Magazine's writer, David Quammen, comes down on a trip with us. And, obviously he's impressed with everything. And then he decides to do an article in Outside Magazine about me. And then he does another one about me, puts me on the cover of Outside. Now, in those days, the cover of Outside was a big deal. So that
Big
just
deal.
opens other doors.
Right.
Yeah, other doors. So in the Olympics, I didn't win a medal in the Olympics, but who does Canoe Magazine put on their cover? I've been on the cover of Outside, right? And they're not putting a flatwater, they're covering the flatwater scene. And what the hell do they put a whitewater photo of me on the cover for? I have no idea, but
So it sells more than somebody going across the lake.
Maybe. So then things start happening even more so. Like now if I go to a sponsor or something, and things started happening that same way in Chile at an absurd level. You talk to someone in Chile, oh, he's a multiple Olympic champion in flatwater and whitewater, and I've won my medals in places, but come on. And it's almost embarrassing. It's like being a Navy veteran with a fake medal on your deal. It's so bad in this town that I can't even stop the momentum. And and I'm even at the border, and the border guard's giving me grief, right? The supervisor comes out because we were having a complicated crossing, and he says, "Do you know who you're talking to?" He says to the new agent, and I'm going, "What the fuck? Excuse me. You know who you're talking to? That's Chris Spelius, world champion kayaker, discovered Futaleufu." It's embarrassing. I mean, at least get it right. He's a pioneer in of the Futaleufu and Chile kayaking. Get it right. Or,
Right.
He's competed at high levels in many disciplines in the sport.
all the true accolades are big enough as they are. Like you don't have to embellish them to be an amazing life, but it's almost like your legend has outgrown even like the true accolades.
The reality. Oh, for sure. And for sure down here. And,
Yeah.
and from the very beginning, I mean, I could go back. I mean, if you want to understand why I like Chile so much, I mean, it's almost from day one. What happened to me that is so strange. And I could that's another story in itself, but you'll probably want to stick with whitewater. But I should tell you that off the cuff. What happened on day one arriving in Chile is just unbelievable. And the culture's been really nice.
I want to hear
me.
about the first time you paddling the Futaleufu and what that was. I mean, I know you weren't the first person, but you did it solo. I mean, and this is before being able to look up something on YouTube, of course. You just went off the beta from the first people. Talk to us about that your first descent down the Futa. And then I love the story you tell when you get to the point there where the Azul and the Futa comes in and you kind of fantasizing and dreaming about owning that one day, and now you do. So tell us that story.
Okay, well, my first trip down there, I didn't have the benefit of a truck or anyone else. I was, I would paddle these rivers in Chile by interacting with the culture, making friends, and someone took interest in what it would do, and they'd drive me up. Their family would drive me up. I mean, the interaction with the culture. Now, mind you, the first day I arrived in Chile, unbeknownst to me, I was giving a clinic at their local kayak club, which is sponsored by the federal government, the flatwater boat. So they knew I was coming. They had someone there taking photos, seemingly interviewing me. I didn't know really what was going on. I mean, I didn't have very good Spanish at the time. And so apparently they were writing an article. So anyhow, the NOC crew gets on the train. This is just all fantasy stuff for me. Sleeper cars, dining room on the train, showers on the train. And you blast into the south, to this new land, right? You're going to go do the Bio. We get to the station there in Victoria. And I don't know, did you ever know Les Bechtel or some of the early guys?
Yeah, I've met Les, yeah.
A real solid river leader, really is.
Right.
He was like a Vietnam leader, and he looks after his troops. He really does, looks after his troops.
Big time Swiftwater rescue.
Him as an older guy, yeah. I mean, he's a class act. He should be in the NOC Hall of Fame for helping build it, the way it was. I don't think he ever got as much credit as he deserved. And,
Sure.
And there's a lot of people I'd like to give credit to that, but when you get more credit than you deserve, it is a little disturbing. I don't, like you said, there's some real things there that are real. I don't want to discredit it and I know my comrades react to that too. Some of them, I didn't invent any role that I know of, but I did put the name C2C on the C2C role, and I even stole that from my girlfriend at the time that was a ballet dancer or something, and she was saying, "Oh, the movement of the spine is like a C2C." And I grabbed that in a second, right, and started when I was because at the time I was doing the video for Perception.
Right.
So when I say, yeah, I gave the name to the C2C role because it's I'll say that to some students one time, or as an instructor training class. And people reacted, no, not the students reacted poorly to it, but my co-instructors reacted poorly to it. Right. So I tried to avoid it. And even in those days, I noticed it beforehand. Before I was on Outside Magazine, I noticed, there's a big legendary paddler with Walt Blackadar. Did you ever hear of him?
Sure. Oh, sure. Yeah.
In the early days, he grabbed all the publicity. Here's his doctor, big personality. Huge personality. And, he's not nowhere near as good as these kayakers that were coming up now, that were younger, in the 20s, started paddling maybe when they're 16, 17 or something like that. Nowhere in the same league as far as skill. But this guy had balls, and he would drift in anything in holes, and he got all the publicity. And there was so much jealousy about that. The younger paddlers are better, and here's this guy getting national publicity, writing an article for Sports Illustrated, national stuff. And then I noticed that when this girl, Cameron O'Connor, got a lot of publicity, there did seem to be jealousy around that too, and that like everyone likes publicity, but at this point, you like sharing the stuff with people, but I don't think I was ever jealous of those guys. I sort of admired them, even Cameron O'Connor. I mean, she has balls. These guys that just had balls, because Brad, I was careful. I studied Zeta. And these guys would tell me, "Oh, I don't want to scout. I get too nervous." I go, "What the hell? You got to be, for me, throne room is a game of inches from the top, stacking the deck in your favor all the way down. And like you say, stacking the deck in your favor, and Zeta too, where you start from, the position, the kind of momentum you get going to that right side. And you don't scout. Who thinks that way? Someone that thinks it's a flush. So I really, really am different than, and fear. I live with fear for sure. I don't want to fuck up. So, excuse my language again, but Brad, I just remember talking to you, not the video, Brad. So
that's okay. I'll throw the explicit content on it, and we'll be fine.
You can edit it.
Yeah, I'll just throw the explicit label on it.
So Brad, there was times when I was running Throne Room by myself. One big difference for me too is those guys that came down here and ran this river, put all their food in their boat, ran down the river, ran with other gringos, 4 of them, I think, 3 or 4. And I'm from day one dependent and interacting with the culture. So up in the town, day one in Futaleufu was crazy. Oh my God. No. Day one in Chile was crazy. Day one in Futaleufu was crazy. Getting way more credit than I deserve. But it's a quick deal. The Sunday paper in Santiago has a color back page with photos and stuff. And so whoever was photoing me and took the interview of it has the whole display on the back page of La Cuatro. I think it's, it's not the business paper of the country, but, the popular paper of the country. So it's in color, all these pictures of me there. So I show up at this train station in southern Chile, and of course the paper arrives with the train. So they started, unloading the paper. And suddenly people are looking at me on this train station as we're waiting for the steam train to pull up and take us up to the Bio Bio. There's steam trains down there still in the 80s. So not all of the trains down to there were electric. So everyone's looking at me and go, what the hell? I'm kind of a thug. You don't get that much attention in the States from babes or anything. So I'm kind of going, what is going on here? I'm no movie star, nothing like this. And they're looking at me like that. And then in the steam engine had pulled in, and in the cargo car, the baggage car right behind the steam engine, the engineer, the brakeman, and the conductor are, eating lunch in this open box car. And I'm walking by. Of course, I'm looking at a steam engine. Been fascinated with trains since we started traveling out west on the trains when I was a kid. And I'm looking at this real live steam engine. I go, wow, I always wished that I could be in the States when steam engines were still running and the West was still the West. And here I am, looking at the steam engines, and these guys, come on up and eat lunch with us in Spanish. And, I was a little confused. I said, come on, share the food. So I pop up there, and then they've got the paper flipped over to the back side and said, have some lunch. And started eating. They wanted to drink wine. I don't drink anything. So I think I took a little sip and set it down. And they wanted me to sign the newspaper. And I'm looking at, oh my God, this is what's going on. While these people are looking at me at the train station, I was on the back page of the newspaper. My first day in Chile, I haven't done a damn thing except for teach one class, which I do all the time. So I'm going, okay. So then I'm thinking, okay, how I always wanted to ride in a steam engine, so I'm going to try to push my luck and say, hey, can I ride up here? ¿Puedo adelante aquí con ustedes? I knew very little Spanish, but I knew that, and they said, wait till we're pull out of town and we go around the curve. We'll stop the train. You hop out and come on up.
Oh my gosh!
Now I knew these guys were drinking, so these guys, Brad, these guys were blitzed. I could tell by their noses they were alcoholics.
Right.
No doubt about it. And so, but I'm as stoked as can be. I get to be not in some, a real working steam engine. So I get up there, and I realized why they faded away from steam engines. So this thing, is noisy, rough, and the wheels, they don't articulate. These are like 4 drivers. Those wheels are steady. So they get banged, just like water down a river, Brad. Water doesn't turn. The river has to force it to turn, right? The water goes straight till it hits something. And so this train absolutely does that around the curve. It's a series of straight lines that make a circle. It's like bang, 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 bang. And then the soot was pretty bad. When you go through the tunnel, the soot comes in there and you go, Jesus Christ, this is a filthy experience. If you got a white shirt on, forget it. And these guys were laughing and drinking. And then you get to the first town and you realize there's not a road up in this area. So everyone shows up at the train station, right? And they unload the stuff and you go, this is an experience. This is traveling back in time, which I wanted to do. I had no interest in going in the future. I wanted to go back. So then the BO was a trip. And right away, Les had me go, I volunteered to go buy the food with zero Spanish, little Spanish in dictionary, because I had studied German in school. So, I'm having a hell of a good time with the locals buying the food from this one grocery store in this little town. All great experiences. So, it wasn't until the next year I fell in love with Chile, and then I would have still continued on training. So then I had to stop all whitewater paddling. Now, do you understand how hard it is for a guy like me to stop whitewater paddling, for this goal of being on an Olympic team or something? That's not easy. And I was following the sport closely, and the boats hadn't gone small yet. I was already squishing my saber down, and the big rage at NOC was AQs and spud boats. Mm-hmm. No, I have nothing wrong with those boats, especially for teaching. They're probably superior at a certain level, but I said, this sport's not involved in an NOC if they're paddling boats like that. I saw what the slalom paddlers are doing, and I also taught with David and Kathy Hearn in Chile on an international committee grant. All this stuff just falls in my lap. I mean, I'm not this driven guy that I want to do this. I want to get this Olympic committee grant. I want to be an outside. No, it just falls, and maybe not even deservingly. And so that was another experience where Davey and Kathy, firsthand paddling with them. We ran a Pan American Championships, set up a slalom course there, and I learned a lot from Davey on surfing. That's the first time I realized, hey, I was a good surfer where I came from out west, and even at NLC I was a good surfer. But by the time that Grant came up. Davy Hearn could outsurf me with one paddle on a pretty big and complex wave. And, I picked his, are you there? Yeah, I picked his brain, like you stay on one side, you can pull and push instantly. You don't have the delay from crossing over to the other side, right? And he showed me a lot about attainments too. So I learned a lot from that guy on that trip with him. But, and that was in Chile also. So all these things just get thrown in my lap. But I was going to say in Futaleufu, because this is my hometown. So I get up there, I'm the kayaker they see. They don't see this first group going down, they just go down the river. I'm going up and asking farmers, hey, can I stay in your barn? And they go, no, you can stay in our house. And then they feed me a meal. So I figured out how to bed and breakfast it down these rivers in Chile because there's the lines between civilization and wilderness are very vague. And some of our, are you there? Does it fade out?
No, I'm here. Keep going.
Am I going too much in detail on this shit?
No, go ahead. It's all good.
Okay, so the police chief in the town of Futaleufu, they have this ceremony. I don't know if you remember when you were here. We had the raft festival, right? But there's a ceremony called the Week of Futaleufu, and they do this inner tube race down the Espelon. And the police chief asked me if I'd be safety. And I said, okay, sure, that's what I do. So the town's kids are racing down, some of the adults too, and the finish line's at the Espelon Bridge, and the whole town's out there on the bridge. And this was back, you came in what, 2000? This is back in
2000.
This is back in 85.
Oh wow.
Or 80. Okay, there's what? One vehicle in town for the police. One ex-policeman had a Toyota 4x4, and there's a town truck. One town truck that brings the supplies in. Now there's probably 6 trucks coming in every week. So it's back there. So he says we run safety. So I go up there and up the bridge, up to that straightaway above the bridge, and start watching the safety. And sure enough, 2 girls come down in this tube, and they tip over. Now I rescue them. And the town suddenly turns me into a hero for rescuing these guys. So this goes even further. So the celebration of the crowning achievements, the raft race, and they give the medals to the different, they divide the town in 4 parts. So each town, part of the town's competing against each other. So they invite me to the ceremonies in the big gymnasium, full of kids. And the mayor comes and says, we want you to sit up here with the officials. The mayor, the chief of the police, other institutions in town are sitting up in front of this whole crowd. I go, what the hell? Why am I coming up here? And then he just turned to introduce me to the crowd. And they give me this honorary photo of the town that I just cherished all my life. When I went home, I said, I have found the place, Mom. This is the place. And the kids are all screaming and yelling. So now I'm instantly known throughout the town. That's my first week in Futaleufu.
Oh my gosh.
So now anyone, the only guy they remember that went down, Chris, you stayed at my house. You were the first one to go down the Futa. What am I going to do? Argue with him? You stayed at my, remember staying with me. And I'm the first one they saw. The first,
right.
Brought other kayakers here. I was interacting with the culture. I was trying to learn Spanish. If I didn't speak to people, I was lonely, Brad.
Right.
So that's how I got to, and I still have those friendships, and people still talk about stuff. We talk about stuff back then. Now it's a much grown town. It's sportsmen from all over, kayakers from all over. It's the in place to be in South America when the water's not high.
Everybody who's in kayaking now is making between Pucon and Futa. It's the main place. You see all the YouTube sensations. All going down there. And I want to bring kind of a little bit more to the current now. You have some really big news. Just protecting natural places, but specifically the Futaleufu has been a main passion for you your whole adult life and for the last 40 years of being down there. Tell us about the big news about the Futa and conservation.
Okay, so the Endesa, the power company, had the water rights for the Futaleufu, and the water rights in the government. What the government does, if you have the water rights, and you're not developing, you have to pay to maintain those water rights. It was, the pro capitalist era when the economic ministers were from the University of Chicago and Milton Friedman School of Economics. They wanted to speed development up. So that was putting pressure on. And then there was this whole series of dams projects they had planned, because all this power is in the south, and all the population's in the north. So, or
Right.
north of here. So it's the power lines to get them out. Now, one dam, two dams, three dams, that's not going to cut it. But if you get this whole grid bringing power from the south, with 6 dams on there, and the rivers they were picking were the rivers that I had selected for my Triple Crown or for my safari river trips. I'm going, what are these guys doing? They're going after everything that I do in my life. They're threatening. This is a huge threat. Like I said,
Right.
What am I doing, wasting any of my time on anything else other than protecting this river? If I really look through my life, I go, the top priority, Chris, higher than boat design or anything, is keeping this river safe. Plus, Brad, I had the experience of paddling the Chattooga. I'd paddle off to work solo quite a few times, and you go down to that Chattooga at a different time of the day, and I could only think, thank God for those guys that I don't know that fought that fight to keep the Chattooga running wild. Guys put in hard time. And, the kind of guys that worked for American Whitewater at the time, American Whitewater Association at the time, these guys are talented professionals working in D.C. as engineers or for the government, know the way, and they put their efforts in. Those guys were given back to kayaking in a big way. Right. And, I enjoyed the fruits of their labor in the Grand Canyon, from Martin Linton, the Sierra Club. Everyone loves the Grand Canyon. For the Wild and Scenic River, seeing the South Fork of the Salmon, which is one of my favorites in the States. And, those guys put in hard time, disciplined time. And I benefited from that. And even the river that we did with my family, that's wild and scenic too. The Upper Missouri Breaks. It's gorgeous. Recommend anyone to do that in sea kayak or canoe or something. But down here on the Futa, I thought, I got to be the guy. I'm the only one. I'm not saying I'm the guy, but I knew I could. Publicity was falling in my lap.
Right.
And it became had a couple guys do videos just on the conservation effort in the Futaleufu, but I'd always, every production, which must have been 12 or 13 over the years from different countries and from Chile, I got the word in on the Futa. And, I thought, God, what am I going to do?
Right.
Some of the young kayakers need to have a little lesson of why they're paddling these things. If people put a good battle in and their time has come, to put some time in, rather than just having a damn good time or hanging out and, taking videos of themselves and who knows else what they do in their parties. But some young professionals came in here, and we had started several different organizations. Futa Fund was the first organization I was going to hit up my clients to help donate it to. But then the Chileans thought, well, Chris is getting money. What's he doing with his money? So then we changed it to Futa Friends. And then there were some sides with that. Okay, the other companies didn't like the idea. When a newspaper would come in, they'd write about me. The Chilean papers Chilean companies didn't like that. So I said, okay, let's change the name again, whatever name you want. We gotta change it. So it became Futaleufu River Keepers. Now, and then Robert Kennedy was sort of the founder of that in the beginning, and you get some little more national presence. But what they don't know is when Teddy Kennedy put sanctions on Chile, that hurt the Chileans, the normal Chileans. The U.S. sanctions hurts the guys on the ground.
Right.
The Kennedy family is not the magical name as liberals from the East might think it is in Chile.
Right.
They've got streets named after John F. Kennedy. But when Ted Kennedy came along, and Robert Kennedy's a hero because he got killed, but when Ted Kennedy came along, he put those sanctions on him when Pinochet was the president. So, you know, that especially in the power people circles in Santiago, you know, the ministers and all that, no. And in one presidential speech or candidate speech, because we had such a battle with the BOB that it became a national battle, he said, I'm not going to let people in little botecitos, you know, little boats, stop the hydroelectric development of our country. Now that was like a knife in my heart. And so now everyone that comes here loves it. Now these young professionals are coming here, and I met this couple. Oh my God, lawyer. I think they're both lawyers, both well spoken, and they know what work is. And I said 3 years ago to my daughter, I said, these guys can do it. You know, we've gotten this far. So they just secured last week the water rights from the government in such a capacity that, you know, no hydroelectric project can be built here unless it's just a side stream. Because this is huge news. And then they had the ceremony. They didn't even tell me what the ceremony was for. You know, just came down, and they were honoring the people that had put in the effort before them. So that's how clever they are, right? And the government, the head of the direction of water, who is, you know, my enemy, I thought, and said was there and said how happy he was that these rights are served for nature and recreation. So, you know, that is friggin' huge. And, awesome. You know, and I'm not saying all the guy that I was crying in the wind and being able to convince people to do a production or write something about it and, you know, tell the story. That's all I could really do. You know, at one time at its worst, both me and another guy that were involved in it were scared when it really heated up. We're scared that someone was following us, you know, when we went to Santiago. We were scared. Now, that could have been paranoia. But we both felt the same thing. And we thought, you know, they wouldn't shoot this little plane down or something. That were, you know, the Pinochet was a dictator.
Right.
You know, so there could be paranoia. You know, who knows? But at that worst time, I was scared to get on the plane, and so was he. Because, you know, it hit national news, the resistance, and it hit the TV stations too. And CNN had interviewed. So then, you know, you also get tired and the company is growing and there's other people to take up the slack. And it is a team effort. And these guys really closed the deal with tireless lawyer kind of work and people contributing to the Pew Foundation and to the Futaleufu River Keepers. You know, they pulled it off. And, you know, now we got other things to worry about that my daughter's going crazy about. You know, development, people, you're not allowed to cut these trees down on the river. You can't cut down native forests without permission, and they're cutting down trees. Foreign kayakers are building on the river, cutting down the trees. Of anyone that should know, you know, they're the worst. And, you know, you can build something, I don't know if you remember, but, you know, our whole camp's there with the idea that it can't be seen from the river. So that when you float, and there's you know, every person I said, why don't you build a dining room overlooking the river? No way. Why don't you do that idea you had of putting that hot tub on that big rock just out in front of the sauna in the river? It'd be spectacular. No. You know, you got to think about the other users. So I feel very betrayed on that. Before there are other users going out of my way to make, you know, I even don't let my wife leave chairs on the beach overnight. If we were going to put the chairs out there and enjoy it, then we take the chairs off the next day. Someone floats by, they just see a beautiful beach.
Right.
So I do feel ethic-wise, I feel disillusioned. But on the other hand, the professional guys that have come down, and they're kayakers, you know, I've battled them before. I don't think they're Zeta kind of paddlers, but they love this place, and they've got real money coming in from the foundations, and you know, there's results there that these guys did, and in the ceremony. So I go down there, and they said, you're going to have to talk. And I said, well, okay. You know, I think about all this stuff, so it's not that hard for me to talk. But then I said, the other Americans that spoke had spoken in English with an interpreter. And I said, well, I think I would like to give this thing in Spanish. And I'm just was going to say, but I think I want the interpreter too, so I can say all the details that I want. And in that hesitation there, the crowd started going, Espanol, Espanol, Espanol. So I had no choice, right? And it came off okay. But really, it's a huge team effort. I was just happened to be, the first noticeable person down here to the community. And
Right.
I get more credit than I deserve. And the two, Pia Weber and Paolo, these guys are so sharp, such high social skills, and the luring background, and idealistic. They're ready to take on the world. And so I would make a call for anyone that they can donate money to the Futaleufu cause to continue to force these other rules about development on the river and no cutting any riparian environment trees at all. I mean, these are old growth forests, and they cut them down. I could send you some photos. You should put those photos in your podcast if you can. The slaughter of these trees by outsiders, and it's totally illegal, but no one pushes it. So now they've got a web page where you can report it being done, but there should be something at the title office. Hey, if you're buying land on the river, you got to understand these rules before they even buy it or as they're buying it.
Right.
So, who would have thought that the river people could also be your best allies, but also your worst enemies for hurting the river corridor?
Right. Yeah.
And it's expensive land down here, but relative to the U.S., you can't buy it unless you're Ted Turner or something,
Right.
Bill Gates or Zuckerberg, those guys that can buy it. So that's pretty big news for the paddling community. It hasn't really been printed anywhere. So as far as I know, you got a scoop on something that's 2 weeks old.
Well, cool. We'll move this. I actually record a couple weeks. They don't release for a couple weeks afterwards, but we will push this episode, right up to the top here and get you on so we can break this exciting news. And the Futa, even though I only spent one winter there, it's a special place to me. So I'm really excited that it's going to be preserved for a long time.
Yeah, you must have had some emotion with the experience that you had going in and what you're doing coming out. There must have been some stimulating moments, I would think.
I don't know that you remember this, but because we had drove down the crew that you had hired, and when we hit that bridge on the lower Futaleufu, when you come into town, and of course we had been driving for days and ferries and everything. I made whoever was driving, I said, pull over. And they were like, what are you doing? And I went and I, like, in my clothes, and I jumped in the water. And it was just like being baptized. I mean,
yeah, right.
You and my dad being such good friends and hearing stories and legends of you, and then, learning from you. And then just the Futaleufu was like this magical destination. I mean, literally like almost like another world. And so to finally be there and to be on those waters, at the end of that season, you had invited me to come back, and I said I was going back to school, and I didn't go back to school for a couple more years, but sometimes I kick myself for not taking you up on that and returning. But
well, I ran into a guy in Futa here that said at a rodeo like 35 years ago in Portland, in Bob's Hole, he said I invited him to come down to work, and he said he's regretted that move his whole life, So he came down and he worked for me at 50 something, So
oh wow,
yeah, but he's a good guy.
I'm not yet 50. I got a few more years, so maybe there's a window for me to have a second opportunity here in a couple.
Second opportunity, it's still here, man. So the only rapid that's really changed is they sort of. You remember the Inferno and that horse trail up there, and the horse trail was sort of supported by logs from underneath it. You probably wouldn't ride your horse over it if you knew what was supporting that trail into the cliff. Right. Remember that at all? Well, yes. They turned that into a 4-wheel drive road, and so they dynamited stuff, and it blasted it down into the river and made another rapid there. What it does is all that rock fall tends to dam up and slow the river down, right? And then it washes out the drop upstream. The rapid upstream is so now like a little lake, relatively speaking. And then the drop all happens going over the big rock pile. So it made kind of a nasty rapid that we call dynamite. But it's been 8 years now, maybe, or no more than that, probably 12. that it's sort of smoothed out now with the floods, but it's still a rapid, still one of the bigger ones. So it made a benign rapid into a big rapid and took the drop away from the benign rapid. And because how above big constricted rapids, there's always a slow lake-like effect that creates a high rapid. But let's see, did I really finish up on the rodeo thing? So I knew when I was playing in Hellhole and I had seen photos of my dad in the ski world, how fast a sport can evolve. And I said, this is just the beginning of what's going to happen. I knew that. And I knew the boats were going to go flat, and thought given to how the bile slices in and slices out. And that's what, another good boat of the day was the Hurricane, the Pucon Hurricane. But we had the front end made for overshooting and slicing in and then turning that baby on side. And then I was telling Joe Pulliam at the time, it can slice in and you can screw it in as much as you want in real time, Brad. It's not like you're picking your spot and driving it in for the ender or the retendo or something like that. You can control this through the process, which is all what, with the McDonough was doing with his squirt boat and stuff like that too.
Right.
So that was a good training plan for him, those early days. And then shortly after the sales of Dagger were, increasing, then everyone, within 4 years, everyone had their little pro team going around. So that was the evolution of it. I saw it. So I thought, except for I had a much better deal. I got royalties. It was just a hired gun. Yeah. And I had the ear of the president of Dagger. So I was styling. I living like a dirtbag, able to buy land in Chile. And that Dagger money, and at the time there's a dictatorship in Chile. The currency's collapsed, and people don't have money, so they're begging me to buy land from them, right? So again, just another Forrest Gump running into good luck. You can't screw up because the fortunes, the good things are conspiring to help me, and the whole Chile thing too was just, how does this stuff happen?
Yeah. Well, your connections at Dagger is how I got my first connections there. So, that.
Okay, and you still got them. You still got them there, yeah.
Yeah, and well, I mean, I didn't continue them all this time because I stepped away from the sport. But now coming back to the sport, I reached out to them, and they thought that my story of 20 years off and returning was a great story, and they put me on their ambassador team and are now big supporters of the podcast. So it's really,
that's great.
Full circle with them.
And you kind of bridged those eras too,
Yeah, Tommy DeQueer and I were talking about that. He kind of gives me credit for being that bridge between, but everybody stands on the shoulders, like him and the Pablo Perez's stood on the shoulders of people like you and Bob McDonough and Bill Hester, and then then my group, and then it kind of evolves, and now where the sport's gone with the Dane Jacksons and the Annuals, I know Annuals down there on the Futa a lot, like what they can do in a kayak now is just unbelievable.
Yeah, and I saw Jackson at the airport last year, and I could see what he was trying to do with that design. Give him the maximum bulbous up front and the most radical stern out there on a river running boat. Just what he wants. I mean, that's the kind of thinking I had back in the RPMD. I got to have something back here, or it's not worth paddling. And guess what boat's my daughter's favorite boat?
I don't know.
She still paddles the few RPMs we have in both countries, and
really?
She says she won't paddle. Yeah, and I didn't influence her in that at all. I thought something, but she did. She went down with some slalom kids down the Grand, Donna Klodek's daughters and teams, and she really is competitive. So when she sees them doing something in that slalom boat, and they brought her a slalom boat. So, she really started, squirting, and if she sees another girl do it, and, she's going to be doing it. There's no doubt about that.
Right.
So the evolution of this stuff and the evolution of boat design, and I didn't keep my thoughts secret. In those days when that World Championships were at the Akoi, I had the Piranha guy coming up and asking me what my thinking was and all that, and I shared what I thought and where it was going.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to, pick their brain too. And Piranha's always done a pretty damn good job with boat design. because
Yeah,
seeing the curiosity of that guy who was the guy at the time, you can't go wrong if you're really curious of why people are
right,
doing stuff, what's going on. So they always had some good boats. They never had a shitty year. I didn't think.
right. Yeah, for sure.
And
Well,
what
as we
else?
kind of wrap up here, my last couple questions, I do a rapid fire segment at the end where I throw out a topic and you got to rapid fire give me your Mount Rushmore. So I'll throw out a topic about kayaking to you, and you tell me like the first things that come to mind of like your favorites or like the all-time greats of different categories.
Okay.
All right, so the first one is a softball. This is an easy one. Favorite rivers of all time.
Well, Futaleufu, the Puelo, and the Fui are hard to beat here in Chile.
Yep.
South Fork of the San, the Grand Canyon, Westwater, and I had to throw in Niagara as a trip. Um, those, I would say, in the States. I like the Susitna in Alaska, but it was a little rough when you're participating in the what do you call it, the food chain. When you're walking through the woods. Down here in Chile, I could take a nap along the throne room up on the cliff and nothing's going to hurt me. In Alaska, I couldn't really get my handle around what the threat is. So
Gotcha.
that's always in the back of my mind. You could lose your boat and your shoes, and you can walk back to Tres Moncas on that trail and not destroy your feet. There's not many river in the western U.S. or in Alaska or anywhere that you can walk back barefoot to, a safe place. But anyhow, the Tuga also makes that list.
Yeah.
Just because of the immersion in nature, it's pure.
Yes.
I just can't do it to. I like the golly and stuff, but I just can't do it to the Ocoee and stuff like that. It's so industrial influenced by the copper mine up there and stuff like that. I love paddling them, but it's got, for me, to be really touched, to be on that Mount Rushmore, it has to have a natural component, a pure watershed. The sand beaches from non-dammed rivers, all that. The only river there that I think is really completely dammed that I get listed was the Grand Canyon, probably, where the sand beaches are hurting.
Right.
But so I
The
guess that's the
next
top five.
the next category would be kayak designs. Now, no, obviously the RPM would be up there, but what about some other boats that you've paddled through the years that you just really like?
Well, at the time, everything's relative. At the time, I really
Right.
believed in asymmetrical craft. A different
Hmm.
stern, significantly bow. And at the time when we were making that transition, we were criticized. Well, if you're asymmetrical, how can you paddle backwards or something? Which is a part of play paddling back then. And I didn't buy into that. I wanted a different kind of tool in the back than I had in the front. Um, and I in the day, I can't believe I paddled it exclusively on the Futa for 1 year. Was my Dominator that was a squished saber. Do you remember the saber at all?
Yeah.
It was like a plastic squirt boat. And of
Right.
course, I was working with Perception at the time, so I could just go over to the factory and get them. They'd give them to me, and I'd squish them down, and they didn't seem to mind that. But I remember thinking when Nana Hale was not going more radical designs, that was instructors were in the big puffy boats. I thought, wow, the sport's going to evolve, and it's going this way
Yeah.
for sure. And then there's been a rebirth of there are all these creek boats and stuff. And
Right.
I was wrong on that with Dagger. I just said, okay, I'll paddle this creek boat, but I underestimated the importance of creeking for Eastern paddlers. They don't have the
Yes.
big rivers. They're not
Right.
traveling out west into Chile every year like I was. So I underestimated that creek boat, and so I paddled the free fall in rodeos at times too. And you could make
Right.
it do things, but I had no idea that was going to get as big as it was. Now I felt some things. I thought, yeah, I called that one. But I remember my failures too. That was one.
Mhm.
I didn't really encourage them. Do you think you're going to sell enough of these? Because you kind of relate to what you like and all that.
And I know, like
And
in Chile, you've done some creeking. I mean, certainly there's waterfalls on the Fui and things, but creek boating never really was an avenue that you pursued much, was it?
No, and one thing I was worried about, when I would, another mentor of mine was Ken Castorf, in the teaching world. He
Yeah.
really was put his clients number one, man. But he was my guide for quite a few years, and when we do the steep stuff, I would defer to him and let him analyze it and what he thinks. And then, like if someone would hit bottom, I was always scared because I was heavier than anyone
Right.
else on the trip. I go to man, I don't want to go flat. I know you can hurt your back there, and is there enough bubbles here to not hurt yourself? And there was a famous Perception commercial or ad with a kayaker in it that he broke his back on that ad, and they still ran it for like 5 years.
That was
He's
corn.
boofing down a water. What's that?
That was
Well,
corn
Corn broke his
Madison.
back on that. No, I think it was another guy
Oh, okay. All
but
right.
Corn
Sorry.
broke his back too at Horseshoe, something in North
Yeah.
Carolina.
Right. Yeah.
You remember that?
Yes.
And I don't think that was publicized everywhere where he's falling flat, but they publicized it everywhere. I couldn't understand that. And then there was another ad out there that was at Prescott College, control your own learning is what it said. And I thought, God, if that's controlling your own learning, they had the guy high bracing in a hole. It was just asking for dislocation.
Mm.
And they ran that because they got so many inquiries off that ad.
Right.
As a guy in a kayak, I can college? Yeah, let's go to Prescott College. But it's irresponsible, to have that photo out there. But yeah, so the boat wise, that was the question, right? What's your favorite boats?
Yeah. Favorite designs of all time. Yeah.
Okay, it's a different era now, and I've gotten used to rocker. So because of
Yeah.
my daughter loved the RPM so much, I still got the power to move a slow boat fast. So if I got into the RPM at the play park on the North Fork in Idaho there, and I almost stumbled over my feet. I missed the very first ferry, because I just thought the rocker would do it. I'm just totally used to taking that tail down. The thing I like about that kind of boat, and I was talking about with another guy, is it's like automatic transmission. It's user friendly, but it's not as powerful of having the four on the floor and kind of stuff. The rocker, you get what they give you in a way, but when you've got a really slicey stern, you can take that bow up at any time. And here's what I maintain, Brad: if you're in the inferno at high water, it's friggin' chaos. And if you're backing people up just underneath the rapid, you're getting slammed against the shore in the eddy. The pulse is coming off that crazed rapid at Inferno. And with a small stern, you can just take that stern down and let the bow go over all that shit and realign yourself. Do you follow?
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
you have to
Stern,
do
yeah.
it.
Right.
And you have to have a feel of that edge slicing under, and you got to be doing stern squirts and slicing around all the time. But it gives you and there's food there. Yeah, I don't even see myself on this screen. I don't know if that's essential or not. Should I turn on the light?
That's okay. We're almost done. Um,
Okay, so
I got
that's boat design. Yeah,
one last
and I
question.
do.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, one last thing on that boat design. I do paddle, recent designs mostly, like the goat and the sleaze, as I call it. But there's a lot of marketing, and because top studs that are in the video, you just because Ceriolis says, Red Bull's the top thing. I'm not drinking Red Bull, but there's a lot of people that might. But
Right.
in my day,
Right.
so now they just carry that video around and they become sponsors. I think they're making some good money doing that.
Yeah. Everybody with a GoPro now is a video star.
Right, everyone wants to be that. Yeah, exactly. I saw that coming about 8 years ago. Even women paddlers who are down here. There was this Rhodes scholar, Jody, studied in Buenos Aires on a Rhodes scholarship, and her ambition at the time was to follow the kayakers around and video. So I thought that was really strange. Here she obviously had a foot in the real world, and that was what she wanted to do. So kayaking and the crowd of kayaking is really strong pull for men and women alike.
Right. So the last question is, I call it final flow. And I want you to think about if there's a river god and he comes down and he says, and Chris, this is your last day to ever be in a kayak, but you get to be any age you want to be. You get to be on any river you want to be on. You get to be any boat you want to be in, and you get to pick the people who are with you. What would it be?
Oh, that's interesting. Because I talked about it with my family, this was a couple of years ago, and I said, hey, if we're going to do a family Niagara trip, we better do it soon. I'm getting older. And this takes you back to any age you want to be, but that's the people around you, they're not born yet, or what would happen in
Well,
that
you get
scenario?
you
Because
can
I'd
you
like,
can magically import, Chillaway can be her age, and you and Rosie can be, in your late early 30s and be prime. I mean, however you want to do it, it's your final flow.
okay, well, I would probably realistically say I want to be on a natural river with, some of my best friends from that country. And it's definitely doesn't even have to be whitewater with a part that I'll enjoy. Sometimes it's between the
Mm,
rapids. It is so sensual, the way the water flows, and sometimes it's a shoreline. Like I mean, above Terminator, I don't know if you remember, all the curves are feminine curves. The
mm.
potholes, all curves and butts and boobs, and everything is just smooth, 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 and it's really an interesting place. Like I thought, wow, Sports Illustrated should do their swimsuit issue there because it's just so black rock in kind of a threatening place, but with all these soft lines. It really, I thought was interesting. So the shoreline's important to me too, and the trees and
Mm,
all that stuff.
sure. Well, Chris, this has just been just an epic adventure and storytelling, and man, it brings me back to the nights sitting around the down there at the guide house and in the cookhouse there, and hearing you tell stories and working for you on the Futa. This has just been an incredible trip down memory lane. I really appreciate you being on the show. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of B Flow Sessions, where we explore how paddlers find their flow on the water and in life. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow the show, leave a rating, or share it with a friend. It truly helps us grow the community. And a huge thank you to Pucon Kayak Retreat for sponsoring today's episode. If you're ready for a world-class Chilean whitewater adventure, email me at bflowkayak@gmail.com and I'll help you get dialed in. Until next time, keep finding your flow.